My name is Emily Carter. I'm 27 years old. The night before my final interview for one of the most competitive federal judicial clerkships in the country, my younger brother Ryan smiled while he dropped my acceptance packet into my parents' living room fireplace. He didn't throw it in during an argument. He didn't lose his temper. He waited until I stepped away to answer my phone. Then he picked up the envelope, held it over the flames, and let it go. I lunged toward the fireplace, but by the time I reached it, the edges of the documents had already curled into black ash. I remember staring at the fire because my brain refused to understand what my eyes were seeing. My mother didn't move from the sofa. She looked up from her tablet for barely a second before saying, "Emily, stop overreacting. It's only paperwork. If you're really qualified, they'll already have copies." My father sighed as though I had interrupted his evening. "Ryan's under a lot of pressure right now," he said. "Don't turn this into another family drama." Ryan simply shrugged. I guess accidents happen. The room smelled like burning paper and cedar wood. I reached into the fireplace with the poker and managed to pull out half of one page before it completely disappeared into ash. That single burned page stayed folded inside my purse all the way to Chicago the next morning. 6 hours later, I sat across from Chief Judge Nathan Holloway inside the federal courthouse. His eyes drifted toward the charred corner of paper sticking out of my folder. Then he looked at my last name. Something changed in his expression. Without saying a word, he unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk. He removed a sealed envelope that looked as though it had been waiting there for years. He studied me for several seconds before asking quietly, "Miss Carter, are you the attorney from the Riverside eviction case?" Every thought inside my head stopped. I had never listed Riverside anywhere in my application. I had never spoken about it publicly. Very few people even knew it existed. Someone else had already told him about it. What my family believed they had stolen from me was about to expose everything they had spent years hiding. If you've ever been the child your own family decided would always come second, this story is for you. Like the video, subscribe if you're enjoying stories like this, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let me start from the beginning. I grew up in Lake Forest, Illinois, about 40 minutes north of downtown Chicago. Our house overlooked Lake Michigan from the top of a quiet hill lined with century-old oak trees. People slowed their cars just to admire it. The local newspapers loved photographing charity galas held on our front lawn every summer. My father, Richard Carter, had spent nearly 30 years becoming one of Chicago's most recognizable defense attorneys. My mother, Victoria Carter, chaired enough charity boards that people assumed she cared deeply about helping others. She cared deeply about appearances. There was a difference. I was their first child. Ryan was born 4 years later. From the day he entered our family, every conversation somehow circled back to him. When relatives visited, they admired my report cards for a few seconds before asking where Ryan was. When neighbors complimented my grades, my mother smiled politely before reminding everyone how naturally gifted Ryan was becoming. He was 6 years old. I was already learning that achievement had an expiration date inside our home. The first memory that still keeps me awake happened when I was 11. It was my county debate championship. I had spent months preparing. 32 schools competed. When they announced my name as the winner, I searched the audience until I found my parents. My father clapped twice. My mother smiled for the cameras. As we walked toward the parking lot afterward, she wrapped an arm around Ryan and laughed. "Did you see how confidently your brother spoke to everyone afterward?" she said. "That boy is going to own every courtroom he walks into one day." Ryan hadn't participated. He'd spent the afternoon eating popcorn in the lobby. No one mentioned the trophy sitting in my lap during the drive home. That was how praise worked in our family. It always found Ryan. When I turned 15, I discovered something else. Dreams weren't assigned equally either. One evening during dinner, I told my parents I wanted to study law. Not corporate law, not criminal defense. I wanted to represent people who couldn't afford attorneys. Families who lost everything because they couldn't fight back. My father slowly placed his fork on the table. My mother exchanged a quick glance with him before smiling the same way adults smile when children announce impossible plans. "That's very sweet," she said. "But legal aid isn't exactly where the best lawyers end up." Ryan laughed. He was 11. "You'll probably change your mind anyway." Nobody told him to be quiet. A week later, I walked past the library while my mother hosted one of her charity luncheons. The doors weren't completely closed. I heard her speaking to another guest. "Ryan wants to become a federal attorney someday," she said proudly. "He already has the personality for it." I stopped walking. Ryan was still in middle school. I was the one who had said those words. She had simply given my future to someone else. That night, I understood something I had been too young to recognize before. My parents hadn't accidentally overlooked me all those years. They had made a choice. They had already decided which child would carry the Carter name into the legal world. It simply wasn't me. So I stopped asking for permission. I worked after school. I earned scholarships. I filled out every college application alone. When Northwestern Law accepted me years later, I called home because I believed, just for a moment, that maybe this accomplishment would finally change something. My mother's first question wasn't congratulations. It was, "Did Ryan hear the news yet? This might motivate him." My father congratulated me. Then he reminded me they couldn't help much financially because Ryan would eventually need law school too. I thanked them anyway. I always thanked them. Looking back now, I don't know why. Maybe children never completely stop hoping their parents will become the people they keep pretending they are. I graduated near the top of my class. Several prestigious firms offered interviews. Everyone expected me to accept one. Instead, I joined the Legal Housing Advocacy Project in Chicago. The salary wasn't impressive. The hours were brutal. Most days I represented tenants facing illegal evictions, elderly veterans, single parents, and families with nowhere else to go. My mother called it career suicide. My father called it wasted potential. Ryan called it loser law. None of them had ever spent 10 minutes sitting beside a mother trying to explain to her children why strangers were carrying their furniture onto the sidewalk. I had. And once you see something like that, it changes what success means. 3 months into my new job, my supervisor walked into my office carrying a thick blue case file. She placed it gently on my desk. "Emily," she said, "there's a family asking for help." She hesitated. "I think this one is going to stay with you." I looked down at the name written across the front of the folder. Maria Alvarez. At the time, I had absolutely no idea that opening that file would eventually destroy my brother's career, end my parents' marriage, and lead a federal judge to keep an envelope hidden inside his desk for nearly 2 years. But that's exactly where everything truly began. The Legal Housing Advocacy Project occupied the 3rd floor of an aging brick building a few blocks west of downtown Chicago. There were no marble floors, no expensive artwork, no receptionists offering bottled water. Just fluorescent lights, overworked attorneys, and filing cabinets that refused to close properly. Most of our clients came to us after they had already been told there was nothing anyone could do. By the time they walked through our doors, they weren't looking for miracles. They were looking for someone willing to answer the phone. I had been there just under 4 months when I met Maria Alvarez. She arrived carrying 2 grocery bags instead of a purse. Inside one bag were legal documents. Inside the other were snacks for her daughter because she couldn't afford childcare while meeting with an attorney. Maria was 38 years old. She cleaned offices at night and worked mornings at a bakery. Her husband, Daniel, had died 3 years earlier after suffering a fatal heart attack while driving home from work. Since then, she had been raising her 9-year-old daughter, Sophia, alone. The eviction notice had appeared on her apartment door 6 days before she found us. The landlord claimed months of unpaid rent. Maria opened every envelope she had brought, every receipt, every bank statement, every money order stub. She had paid every single month. Someone had altered the records. "I don't understand," she whispered. "They keep saying I owe money that I already paid." I spent nearly 3 hours reviewing her paperwork that afternoon. By the time she left my office, I knew 2 things. First, the eviction was fraudulent. Second, winning wouldn't be easy. The property company behind the case had one of the largest real estate law firms in Illinois representing them. We had 3 attorneys, 1 copier that jammed twice a day, and a coffee machine that hadn't worked properly since before I was hired. Still, I accepted the case. 3 days later, Maria returned. This time she wasn't alone. A little girl stepped quietly into my office wearing an oversized yellow hoodie and carrying a paperback novel against her chest. "This is Sophia," Maria said. Sophia smiled politely before sitting in the corner without saying a word. While her mother and I discussed court filings, she quietly read her book. Every now and then, she looked up and listened. When the meeting ended, Maria stepped into the hallway to answer a phone call. Sophia walked over to my desk. She looked at the stack of legal files spread across it. Then she asked the question that stayed with me. Do judges always believe rich people first? I wasn't prepared for that. What makes you ask? I said gently. She shrugged. Because every grown-up we've met says the landlord's lawyers are too powerful. I looked at her for several seconds before answering. No. Then who do judges believe? The evidence. She thought about that. Then she smiled. I hope the evidence likes us. That afternoon, I added one more folder to the case. Not because procedure required it, because I wanted every piece of evidence protected. Looking back, that folder would eventually become more valuable than anyone imagined. Over the next 18 months, Maria became more than a client. She became part of my weekly routine. Court hearings, housing inspections, emergency motions, late-night phone calls. Every setback seemed to create another obstacle. The landlord delayed hearings. Important documents disappeared. Witnesses suddenly changed their statements. It felt less like a housing dispute and more like someone was determined to force Maria into giving up. She never did. Neither did I. Sophia usually sat in the back of the courtroom with a coloring book. She never interrupted. She simply watched. After one hearing, we walked outside together into the cold November air. We had just won a temporary injunction preventing the eviction. Maria cried with relief. Sophia tugged gently on my sleeve. "You won," she whispered. "We're not finished yet," I said. She looked up at the courthouse. "I think you like fighting for people." "I do," she smiled. "Then you're kind of a superhero." I laughed. "No cape." She looked completely serious. "You don't need one." From that day forward, every time I visited their apartment, she greeted me the same way. "My courtroom hero is here." I always pretended to roll my eyes. Secretly, those 4 words meant more than every award hanging on my parents' walls. Months passed. The case slowly turned in our favor. Internal accounting records surfaced. One former employee admitted the property company had been manipulating payment histories to force long-term tenants out so apartments could be renovated and rented at nearly double the price. The judge wasn't pleased. Neither were the company's attorneys. For the first time, I realized we weren't simply helping one family. We were exposing something much larger. Around the same time, Ryan began his second year at Columbia Law School. My parents celebrated nearly every small achievement. Every internship became a family dinner. Every networking event became another excuse to remind me that Ryan was destined for greatness. Whenever anyone asked about my work, my mother answered before I could. "Emily handles landlord paperwork." She made it sound like I spent my days organizing filing cabinets. She never mentioned the trials, the victories, the families. None of that fit the story she preferred telling. One Sunday afternoon, she invited me home for lunch. Ryan was there too. He spent almost an hour talking about prestigious judges he hoped to clerk for after graduation. Eventually, my father looked at me. "So, Emily? Still helping tenants?" I nodded. "I love the work." Ryan smirked. "You know what they say. If you can't make partner, save the world." My mother laughed. "So dramatic." I smiled politely. Then I changed the subject. There are moments in life when arguing only gives people exactly what they want. Silence frustrates them much more. I drove back to Chicago that evening, thinking about Sophia. She had once asked whether judges believed rich people first. At the time, I answered confidently, "The evidence. That's what judges believe." I didn't realize then, the evidence would someday have to save me too. Spring arrived. The eviction case finally ended. The court ruled completely in Maria's favor. The company was fined. Several other tenants reopened their own cases using the evidence we uncovered. Maria hugged me so tightly outside the courthouse that neither of us could speak. Sophia handed me a folded piece of notebook paper. I made something. Inside was a crayon drawing. She had drawn herself, her mother, and me standing in front of a courthouse. Above us, she had written in uneven handwriting, "My courtroom hero." I folded the picture carefully. It stayed inside my desk drawer at work for months. I didn't know then. One day, another drawing from Sophia, one I had never seen, would become the single most important piece of evidence in my entire life. And by then, it would already be hidden inside my parents' house. Winning Maria Alvarez's eviction case should have been the happiest day of my career. Instead, it became the beginning of everything that would eventually destroy my family. A month after the trial ended, Maria called me. Her voice sounded different. "Emily, Sophia's in the hospital." The little girl who had once skipped through courthouse hallways was suddenly fighting a rare autoimmune disease that attacked her heart. I visited after work almost every evening. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we played card games. Sometimes I simply sat beside her while Maria slept in the chair across the room. One afternoon, Sophia handed me a notebook. "I started writing," she said proudly. Inside were short stories, little drawings, and pages filled with dreams. On one page, she had written, "When I grow up, I want to help scared people the way Emily helps them." I smiled. "You'll do even better." She shook her head. "No, I want to be like you." I never forgot those words. Over the next year, her condition worsened. She smiled less. She grew weaker. But every time I visited, she still called me the same thing, my courtroom hero. One October morning, Maria asked me to step into the hallway. "Sophia wrote something," she whispered. "She wants a judge to have it someday." I didn't ask why. I simply nodded. A week later, Sophia passed away. I attended her funeral. So did Maria's neighbors. Her teachers. The nurses who had cared for her. My family never came. A few weeks later, I finally sat down to write my personal statement for a federal judicial clerkship. I wrote about the Riverside eviction case, about Maria, about Sophia, about the little girl who believed evidence could change lives. When I finished, I saved the draft in the Carter family cloud drive, the same account we'd shared for years. I closed my laptop and went to bed. I never imagined anyone in my family would open it, but someone did. And before I submitted my application, every word that mattered most had already been stolen. I submitted my clerkship application in October. Ryan submitted his 3 months earlier. I didn't think much about it until November. My parents suddenly invited me home for Thanksgiving. It had been almost a year since they'd asked me to visit. I thought maybe, just maybe, things were changing. I was wrong. Dinner felt like a celebration, just not for me. My father spent the evening talking about Ryan's interviews. My mother proudly announced that several federal judges had already shown interest in him. No one asked about my application. After dessert, I excused myself and went upstairs to pack for my drive back to Chicago the next morning. When I came downstairs 20 minutes later, Ryan was standing in front of the fireplace. My application folder was in his hands. He smiled, then calmly dropped it into the flames. I ran toward the fireplace. "Ryan!" He didn't move. "It's only paper," he said. "If you're really qualified, they'll call anyway." My mother never stood up. "Emily," she sighed, "stop making everything into a crisis." My father added quietly, "Your brother's under enough pressure already." I stared at all three of them. For the first time in my life, I didn't argue. I reached into the fireplace with the poker and rescued one half-burned page. Then I walked upstairs. At 5 the next morning, I left without saying goodbye. 6 hours later, I sat inside the chambers of Chief Judge Nathan Holloway. The interview began normally. Questions about law school, courtroom experience, legal ethics. Then he asked one question. "Tell me about the case that made you want to become a federal clerk." I answered honestly. "The Riverside eviction case." I told him about Maria, about Sophia, about the little girl who believed evidence always mattered. When I finished, the judge didn't ask another question. Instead, he quietly stood, walked to a locked cabinet, and removed a sealed envelope. He looked at me for several long seconds before speaking. "Miss Carter, I've been waiting almost 2 years to meet the real attorney from Riverside." My heart stopped. Then he said the words that changed everything. "Because someone else from your family already claimed this story." In that moment, I knew exactly who had stolen my future. And for the first time, I realized they had left enough evidence for me to take it back. Judge Holloway asked me to return to his chambers the following week. When I arrived, he placed 2 documents on the table. The first was my application. The second was Ryan's. He turned both pages toward me. One sentence had been highlighted in yellow. She believed the evidence would always tell the truth. It appeared in both essays, word for word. I've served on judicial selection committees for 23 years, Judge Holloway said quietly. People can have similar experiences. They don't write identical memories. Then he handed me one more document, a handwritten letter. The handwriting was uneven, but I recognized it immediately. It was Sophia's. Open quote, "To the judge who reads this, please let Emily keep helping families. She already protects people before anyone asks her to. She is my courtroom hero." Close quote. I couldn't speak. The judge waited until I finished reading. Her mother gave me this letter 18 months ago. I kept it because I hoped one day I'd meet the attorney she wrote about. He looked directly at me. I've met her now. Over the next month, the Judicial Ethics Committee opened a formal investigation. Cloud storage records proved my mother had accessed my original draft weeks before Ryan submitted his application. Metadata confirmed every paragraph had been written by me months earlier. Maria testified. Hospital records confirmed the timeline of Sophia's illness. Finally, my father admitted everything. He turned over text messages showing my mother had deliberately sent my essay to Ryan because she believed he had a better chance of becoming a federal clerk. There was nothing left to deny. 2 weeks later, Ryan's clerkship offer was revoked. His law school opened its own academic misconduct investigation. The same afternoon, I received a phone call from Judge Holloway. "I have some better news," he said. "The committee voted unanimously. We would be honored to have you serve as our newest federal judicial clerk." For a long moment, I simply closed my eyes. Not because I was thinking about Ryan or my parents. I was thinking about a little girl who once sat in the back of a courtroom holding a coloring book. A little girl who believed the evidence would always win. She was right. 3 months later, I moved into my apartment across from the courthouse. On the shelf above my desk sat Sophia's framed drawing that Maria finally gave me after the investigation ended. Underneath it, in a simple black frame, was the half-burned page I had pulled from my parents' fireplace. People sometimes ask why I kept it, because that page reminds me of something I'll never forget. My family believed they could burn my future. What they actually burned was the last lie holding theirs together.